Hello. Today you will hear a story with unexpected plot twists and lots of intrigue. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and like it. It motivates me to write more amazing stories for you. It's also interesting to find out which corner of the world you're watching this video from. And now we begin. Ashes of the Quiet Village. In the far reaches of the kingdom, where the hills roll like waves and the roads narrow into nothing, lay a village untouched by time. There were no names on maps, no stone walls to guard it, and no reason for nobles to care. But that village had something the court had lost long ago: quiet. Elira lived in a cottage that leaned slightly to the east. Her days were filled with tending goats, gathering herbs with her mother, and listening to her father's slow, thoughtful stories by firelight. Her family was known but not important, respected but not powerful. They had little but needed less. The village was the kind of place where years passed slowly and deaths came quietly. But not on that morning. It was early when the first sound echoed through the valley, metal striking stone, hooves cracking soil, and the low breath of armored men. The fog hadn't yet lifted when riders arrived from the south. Red banners draped behind them like blood trailing on silk. No one understood why they came, but they came with purpose. They said nothing. They dismounted with precision, eyes scanning the villagers who had gathered in confusion. Then they pointed to the house with the leaning roof. To Elira. Her mother stepped forward, and the leader gave a slight nod. That was all. No argument, no warning, no chance. When the villagers spoke of that day later, their voices dropped. Some said Elira was dragged. Others said she walked in silence, not daring to resist. A few swore they saw her parents fall to the ground as if struck by lightning, but none could explain what really happened. All that remained was a girl taken, a home left broken, and silence that tasted like smoke. By nightfall, the village was quiet again. Too quiet. Elira's disappearance was never explained. No decree, no notice. The local magistrate claimed ignorance. A traveling priest muttered that some bloodlines run deeper than they appear. Whatever the truth, the fields where Elira once sang were now still. She awoke in a carriage lined with velvet, hands bound in silk. Outside, the world rolled by, unfamiliar and indifferent. Castles rose in the distance, and with them, a fate she could not yet name. At the palace, she was greeted not as a prisoner, but as a guest. She was bathed in rosewater, wrapped in pale fabrics, and led through golden halls by servants who never met her eyes. No one answered her questions. No one explained what had happened. The only words she heard were quiet whispers. She has the look. Elira, that was the name. The king will be pleased. She tried to remember the last moment she saw her parents, the way her mother's hand trembled, the shape of her father's shadow in the doorway, but every memory blurred at the edges. The king did not visit her, not yet, but his eyes, cold and searching, watched from paintings that lined the hallways. Each night, Elira dreamed of the fields, of wind through barley, of silence before the storm. She did not know what she had become, but she was no longer a villager. She was something else now. And somewhere in the distance, far from gold and velvet, the ashes of her old life drifted in the wind. The question hung over the village like morning fog. Why her? And somewhere deep in the castle, someone else was asking the same thing. A bride for the throne. The castle stood like a wound in the hills, beautiful, sharp, and cold. From afar, it shimmered like a dream. Up close, it swallowed the sky. Elira entered through gates taller than any tree she had ever seen. Her feet moved without will. Her thoughts scattered like birds. The path she walked was lined with white stone and silence. No servants greeted her. No voices echoed. Only the faint rustle of her dress and the sound of doors closing behind her. She was led to a room filled with golden light and nothing else. A maid appeared, silent and pale, and began to undress her. Elira tried to speak, but the woman only shook her head gently. She was bathed again, this time with petals and oil. Her hands were cleaned as if her past could be washed away. New clothes waited, a dress pale as frost, slippers soft as air, a silver comb for her hair. When she was ready, no one told her where to go. So she waited. Hours passed. Meals came and went, untouched. Candles burned low. Then, near midnight, a door opened. A man entered, not the king, but someone who served him. He carried no crown, no sword, just words. Elira, you are to be the bride of the king. Her mouth went dry. I don't understand. He smiled as if this was a kindness. The court will celebrate. The bloodline will continue. You have been chosen. She wanted to ask why. Why her? Why now? But the words never came. The man bowed and left her alone once more. From that moment on, her days were not her own. She was taught how to walk, how to eat, how to smile without showing teeth. Tutors came and went. One spoke of court politics, another corrected how she sat, a third placed books in her hands and never asked if she could read them. The world outside the castle ceased to exist. She was told to forget it. They said nothing of love, nothing of choice, only duty. She saw the king once, from a distance. He stood on a balcony above the great hall dressed in crimson and gold. His hair was white, his face unreadable. Their eyes met briefly, hers full of fear, his empty. And yet there was a hunger there. The wedding was to be held in a fortnight, but no invitations were sent, no celebrations were planned, only silence. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Some pitied her, others avoided her altogether. One, an older woman with lines around her eyes, placed a hand on Elira's shoulder as she passed. You remind me of another, she whispered. Elira tried to ask who, but the woman had already disappeared into the stone halls. Each night, Elira sat by the window and watched the moon. She thought of her home, now likely overgrown. She thought of her parents, their absence like a sound she could not unhear. And she wondered, was this what queens were made of? Silence, obedience, loneliness. The days blurred. The dress arrived, white and heavy, a veil like mist, a crown of glass. On the morning of the wedding, she was taken to the chapel. The guards outside did not meet her eyes. The priest said the words with a voice that never rose. The king stood beside her, unmoving. Elira did not cry, not then. But something inside her went still. After the ceremony, she was led to a new chamber, larger, colder. It smelled of wine and smoke. The king entered briefly. He said nothing, only looked at her as if assessing a painting. Then he turned and left. From that day she was called queen, but no one bowed, no one smiled. She wore the crown, but it felt like ice. Strange things began to happen. Notes were left on her pillow, unsigned. One read, "You are not the first." Another, "The garden behind the West Tower." One night she followed a sound and found a boy crying in the hallway. When she asked his name, he fled. She began to hear footsteps outside her door at night, whispers behind the walls, servants who would not speak her name, and dreams of women dressed in white, running through corridors, faces blurred, hands reaching for something they could never touch. The castle, it seemed, had long memories. One evening, as she walked alone through a corridor, she saw him, the prince. He stood by a window, half in shadow, watching the sky. Younger than she expected, eyes full of questions. He said nothing as she passed, but she felt his gaze steady and unreadable. The next morning, a single rose lay on her table, black as ink, no note. She began to wonder, was she truly alone, or was someone else watching? someone who remembered, someone who cared, and someone who might still defy the king. A crown of thorns. She wore the crown, but it never felt like hers. It was too cold, too heavy, and too quiet. Each morning, Elira woke before the sun. The silence in the royal chamber was thick enough to choke on. Her attendants helped her dress, spoke only in instructions, and left without waiting for answers. The halls of the castle stretched endlessly. Her footsteps echoed where laughter never had. Paintings stared. Tapestries whispered. She learned quickly what not to do. Do not ask questions. Do not enter the West Wing. Do not look the king in the eye. The king visited her once more. He did not speak. He sat across from her, drank from a golden goblet, and studied her face as if waiting for something to appear. She held her breath. He left without a word. She heard the locks turn behind him. That night she dreamed of her home. But in the dream, the fields were burning, and the goats bled roses. She woke with tears she hadn't felt fall. The next day the rose returned. Black as before, this time with a note. I remember. That evening the prince appeared again. Not in the corridors, but in the garden. The garden no one spoke of. The garden behind the West Tower. She had followed the note's instruction, unsure whether it was a trap. But something inside her, something old and silent, pulled her there. She found him near a wall of crumbling stone, looking up at ivy. You shouldn't be here, he said without turning. Neither should you, she replied. A pause, then a question. Do you remember the song? She blinked. What song? The one from the river. Years ago. You were a child. You sang. I was hiding behind the reeds. She searched her memory. A day by the water, a breeze, a tune she hummed without thought. That was you. He nodded. I've seen you before, he said. Before all this. They stood in silence, old memories falling between them like leaves. You're not safe, he said finally. None of them were. None of who? The ones before you. He turned then, his face clearer in the dim garden light. They all wore the crown, and none of them are here now. Elira's hands trembled. What happened to them? He looked away. No one speaks their names. The prince led her deeper into the garden. There, under a stone arch, stood statues, 6 in total. All women, all young, all dressed as queens. She stepped closer. The faces were smoothed by time, but the expressions, fear, sadness, silence remained. These are not just statues, he said. They are warnings. I don't understand, she whispered. You will. That night, Elira could not sleep. She walked the halls long after the torches dimmed. In the reflection of the tall windows, she thought she saw someone watching her. A flicker, a shape, gone in a blink. She found a book tucked between others in the library, a forgotten journal with no name on the spine. Inside, pages filled with careful writing, drawings of herbs, symbols, maps. And one entry that chilled her. Today he chose her, the quiet one. I tried to speak. He silenced me, just like the others. No signature, but the handwriting matched the label on the latest rose. The days grew colder, the palace darker. The king no longer visited, but his presence lingered, like smoke in old stone. Elira kept returning to the garden. Each time the prince was there. He never asked her to run. He never offered rescue. He only told her truths no one else dared to say. And for the first time she saw him not as a prince, but as a prisoner too. They were both caught in something older than either of them. A pattern, a cycle, a ritual. And Elira began to wonder, was the crown placed on her head, or had it been waiting there all along? The Prince in the Shadows. In a palace where every step was watched and every silence held meaning, the prince moved like smoke. Few saw him, fewer spoke to him, and none dared ask what he knew. Elira found herself drawn to the places he haunted, the forgotten corridors, the libraries filled with dust, the old garden behind the West Tower. He appeared when she least expected it, always with a question, never with answers. "Do you still dream of fire?" he asked once. She did, and more. She dreamt of women in white, of falling crowns, of doors that locked without keys. Each time she woke, her hands were cold, as if they had held something that no longer existed. In the garden, the prince finally spoke of the others. "There were 6 before you," he said, "all chosen, all prepared, all crowned." "What happened to them?" He hesitated. "They disappeared, one by one. Some said they fled. Others were taken, but none returned, and their names were never spoken again." "Why does no one remember them?" "Because forgetting is safer." They sat in the dark, surrounded by ivy and the smell of damp stone. "I was a child when the first disappeared," he said, "too young to understand, but I watched, I listened, I remembered." She looked at him. "Why tell me now?" "Because you're not like them." "How? You still ask questions?" His voice was tired, but something in it trembled. A quiet anger, or maybe grief. Elira leaned forward. "You knew them." He nodded. "One of them was kind to me. She taught me how to read. She used to sing." A pause. "She screamed before she vanished." They both fell silent. Later that night, he led her through a hidden door in the chapel. Behind it, stairs, deep and turning. At the bottom, a narrow hallway led to a locked chamber. He handed her a key. Inside were remnants, veils, shoes, a single broken crown, symbols carved into the stone, pages torn from books, scraps of ribbon with initials embroidered in fading gold. "This is where they ended," he said. Elira felt the walls breathing, felt the cold reach into her chest. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because I can't watch again," he said. "I couldn't stop it before, but maybe now." He looked at her. "You still have time." She stared at him. "You want me to run?" "I want you to live." The next morning, everything was different. The guards outside her door were new, silent, heavier armor. The maid who usually brought her tea did not appear. The corridors she once wandered freely were closed, locked. Eyes followed her now. Whispers had changed. "She knows." She spoke to him. "The king is displeased." The crown felt heavier, the halls colder, and the prince, gone. Days passed, no sign, no rose, no voice in the shadows. Elira began to feel the walls closing. Dreams turned to silence. The air itself seemed to press against her chest. Until one night, a message appeared carved into the window glass of her room. "When the moon is full, come to the cellar door." Nothing more, but it was enough. She waited, watched, planned. When the moon rose high, she slipped past the guards, down the same stairs the prince once showed her. Her heart beat like thunder. Every shadow felt alive. At the cellar door, he waited, cloaked, pale, eyes lit with something between fear and resolve. "No more secrets," he said. "No more waiting." Elira stepped forward. "What are we doing?" "We're breaking the cycle." He took her hand. Behind them, the castle stood silent. Ahead, the path no queen had ever taken. And for the first time since she arrived, Elira felt something unexpected. Hope. The escape that changed everything. The night was still, too still. Elira stood by the cellar door, heart pacing faster than her feet could carry. Behind her, everything she feared. Before her, the unknown. The prince arrived without sound. He wore a dark cloak, his hair tied back, his face paler than usual. "We don't have much time," he said. "No more questions, no more waiting." He led her through tunnels beneath the castle, old, cracked, long forgotten. Cobwebs hung like curtains. The air was cold, damp with secrets. "Elira," he said softly as they walked, "you need to know something." She turned to him. "You were never meant to be here. It wasn't chance. It wasn't love. It was inheritance." "Inheritance?" He nodded. "Your father was once part of this court, trusted, respected, until he turned against it. The world shifted. What does that have to do with me? Your bloodline threatened the king, not by sword but by memory. He feared what your name could remind people of. And so he took me? He erased what he couldn't control." She walked in silence. Now her presence here made sense. Not for beauty, not for destiny, but for revenge. At the end of the tunnel was a ladder. Above it, an iron hatch. Beyond that, open forest. The prince climbed first, checked the path, then called for her. She followed. The forest air felt unreal, cold and wild. Leaves whispered like voices warning her to run faster. They moved under moonlight, avoiding roads, passing ruins and trees older than kingdoms. Hours passed. Then footsteps behind them. The prince turned sharply. "They're close. How did they find us?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Elira saw something she hadn't expected. Guilt. He didn't answer. A branch snapped in the distance. Horses, armor, light. "Go," he said. "Now. No. Together." But he shook his head. "They won't take both of us." Suddenly a figure emerged from the shadows. A man. Familiar. One of the prince's guards. "Elira," the prince said quickly. "Run to the river. There's a boat. Don't look back." She stared at him. "You planned this?" He stepped closer, voice low. "I thought we had more time." "What did you do?" He didn't answer, but she understood. Someone had been bought. Someone had spoken. The guard raised his hand, a signal. The prince stepped forward, not to fight, but to block. The moment felt endless. Then silence. Then the guard was gone, and the prince was on his knees. Elira ran. Branches cut her arms, roots pulled at her feet. But she ran. Through trees, across stones, until the river came into view. A boat waited, as he had promised. She climbed in, hands shaking, heart torn. The moon reflected on the water like 1,000 broken mirrors. As she drifted away, she looked back. But the forest was still, too still. She did not know if the prince lived. She did not know if he had betrayed her or saved her. All she knew was that the world would never be the same, and neither would she. When the sun rose, she stepped onto a foreign shore. Not a queen, not a villager, but something else. And somewhere behind her, deep in the woods, the crown lay in the leaves, waiting. A silent farewell. The monastery stood on the edge of the world. Built into the cliffs above a pale green river, its stones had been laid long before the kingdom had a name. Wind carved its walls smooth, and silence lived in its halls like an old companion. Elira arrived with nothing. No title, no crown, no name she was willing to share. The sisters welcomed her without question. They called her the Quiet One. She slept in a small stone cell with a narrow bed and a single window that faced the sea. For a time she knew peace. She learned the rhythm of prayer and labor. The weight of water carried in clay jugs. The feel of cool earth under bare feet. No one asked where she came from. No one tried to remember her face. And she never spoke of the castle. But silence is not the same as forgetting. Some nights she woke with the prince's name in her throat. Other nights she dreamed of the garden, of broken statues, of black roses left where no one should find them. She began to write. Small notes, fragments, pieces of what had happened. She folded them into pages and hid them behind stones in the chapel wall. Not as records, but as reminders of who she had been and who she still feared becoming. Seasons passed. Her hair grew longer. Her hands roughened. Her voice, though rarely used, remained steady. She helped in the infirmary. She sang softly when no one listened. The sisters called her gentle, but they did not see the storm beneath. One morning, a traveling monk brought letters from distant places. Among them, a sealed note with no name. Inside, "The crown has not forgotten you." There was no signature, no crest. But she recognized the handwriting. It was the same as the notes from the castle. The same hand that had left the rose. The same hand that once held hers. Elira folded the letter slowly. Her breath caught, but she did not cry. Instead, she went to the garden behind the chapel, a place where the wind always moved, even on still days. She buried the letter under the roots of a tree, whispered no words, and walked away. Some stories end with fire, others with blood. But hers, it seemed, would end in silence, or so she thought. That night, a storm rose without warning. The sea below the cliffs raged, and in the morning a new figure stood at the monastery gate, cloaked, hooded, waiting. He did not speak, but when the wind lifted his hood, she froze, because the face beneath was one she had not seen since the night she left the castle. Worn, pale, alive, but different. He held nothing in his hands, except a piece of folded cloth. She stepped toward him, slowly. He said only one word, "Elira," and she knew. Her silence was ending, and her past was not done with her yet. Whispers in the halls. She returned not as a queen, but as a question. The man who had waited at the monastery gate walked beside her, without speaking. His presence was familiar, but his silence deeper. He wore no seal, no rank, no name, only memory. They traveled under clouded skies, avoiding cities and roads, following paths known only to those who had once fled them. Elira did not ask where they were going. She already knew. The castle rose from the hills like a scar reopened. She had not seen it in seasons, but nothing had changed. The walls still stared. The windows still watched. Inside, the corridors whispered. Elira moved through them like a shadow, unseen, unheard. Servants looked past her. Guards did not stop her. She walked through the silence she once feared, and now understood. In the great hall, she saw the throne, empty, no red velvet, no crown, just stone and dust. "He's gone," said the man beside her. "Where?" "Some say he fell, others say he vanished. But no one wears the crown now." The court had fractured. Nobles turned on each other. The kingdom held its breath. And in the absence of a king, silence ruled. She was led to the West Wing, the part she had once been forbidden to enter. Its doors now stood open. Inside, she found rooms covered in sheets, mirrors draped in cloth, books untouched. But deeper in, she came upon something unexpected. A chamber, bright, warm, with a single chair by the window. And in the chair, a woman, old, still, watching the garden below. Elira stepped inside. The woman turned slowly. "You look just like her," she said. "Like who?" "The first." Elira approached. "You were here before?" The woman nodded. "Before the king. Before the throne." Silence, then a question. "Why did it begin?" The woman smiled faintly. "Because power needs memory to forget itself. And queens were never meant to stay." Elira felt her breath tighten. "Who were you?" Hanela, the woman raised a trembling hand and pointed to a faded painting on the wall. It showed a young girl in white, standing beside a prince not yet crowned. "Elira," she whispered. "That was me." She closed her eyes and never opened them again. Elira left the room in silence, down the corridor, past the statues, to the chapel. She lit a single candle and placed it by the cold altar. She did not pray. She remembered. As she stood in the courtyard, wind gathering around her, a voice broke the stillness. "You came back." She turned. The prince stood there, older, changed, but still him. "I had to know," she said. He looked toward the sky. So did I. They stood side by side, not as heirs or rulers, not as survivors, but as questions the kingdom still could not answer. And somewhere in the castle, in a room with no doors, the crown sat untouched, waiting, not for a head, but for a history that would not repeat, or would. That part, no one could say.